Okay, Chair. On my screen, it's saying we are now live on YouTube.
Very much.
I'm just testing that theory. Bear with me.
Okay.
Yep. Whenever you're ready, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Good evening, ladies and welcome to this Northants Joint Planning Committee meeting, which is the final meeting of the item we have on election of a chair.
So just to confirm, that's election of a chair. Councillor Tebbit, your reception's breaking up, unfortunately.
Is it?
Yeah.
Apologies.
That's okay. So just for the benefit of anyone watching, the first item on the agenda is for the election of chair. So as the chair is a bit crackly with his reception, can I seek a nomination for the position of chair for this meeting, please?
Yes, it's Andrew Scarborough here. May I nominate Councillor Anthony Dady of Corby to chair this committee?
Thank you very much, Councillor Scarborough.
I'd like to second that. Ray Beebe.
Thank you, Councillor Beebe. Do we have any other nominations for the position of chair? No, Councillor Dady, it looks like you've been duly elected as chair. So if you'd like to take over.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, it certainly is an honour to chair this committee. I have been the whole time I've been on it in admiration of many of the councillors on the committee because of their experience and knowledge of the subject, and it's been wonderful to see what the committee has achieved over the years. So I'm glad to be chairing it now. How we're going to work things this evening. I'll be working as chair along with David, dealing with more of the administrative side of things. So when there's time for questions and comments, if you raise your hand, David will go through in order of when the hands are put up and let me know, and then we'll you'll be able to ask your questions and go to the officers for comments and so on, and we should get through everyone smoothly as a result of us both working together on that. Right, item number 2 on the agenda is apologies. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Councillor Dady,
thank you.
I think we might need to do the election of a vice chair as well before we go on to
Oh yes, thank you for mentioning that. It's not on my agenda here, but yes, we need to do that, don't we? Yes. Do we have any nominations for vice chair of this committee?
Chairman, if I can help, it's the county council's turn. So if we could have a county member,
yes, yeah,
not nominated, that would be really helpful. The main reason for identifying somebody is one of the reports recommends that we finalise a response in consultation with the chairman and vice chairman. And having done that, obviously we need a vice chairman to speak to as well.
I recommend Councillor Malcolm Waters as vice chair for this last meeting.
Seconded.
All right, so yeah, we've had that moved and seconded then. Right, do we have any other nominations?
Not seeing anything, Chair.
Right. Well, it looks like Councillor Waters gets to do it then. Congratulations. Do we need to take a vote? All those in favour or anything, or not?
As there's no other nomination, Chair, I should take it as read.
All right. Well, congratulations to Councillor Waters then. Right. We will now move on to item number 2, the apologies for absence. Are there any apologies?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Julie Brookfield.
Right, thank you.
Through you, Chair. Through you, Chair, I see a hand go up from Councillor Tebbit.
Right, yeah,
Councillor Tebbit. Councillor O'Hara will be joining the meeting as soon as she can when she leaves another planning.
Right, thank you. Yeah, along those lines, perhaps we'll have some other councillors joining us a bit late because of the previous meetings they've been at. All right, thank you.
Councillor Jenny, Chair.
Yeah, Councillor Jenny, yes.
I've got Councillor Stephen North's apologies. He's still in the other meeting, so whether he'll come in or not, I'm not certain.
All right, thank you, Councillor Jenny. Right, is that all the apologies?
Sorry, Chairman. One more, and I'm just scanning my emails. I'm pretty sure it was Councillor Allibone. So apologies from Councillor Allibone, unless he's actually here. I think I've got it right.
All right, thank you. All right, we'll move on now to item number 3, the declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest?
There's no hands going up, Chair.
All right, thank you. Right, next, item number 4, the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of October. Do we have any comments regarding those minutes?
Not seeing anything, Chair.
Quite happy to move acceptance, Chair.
All right, thank you, Councillor Jenny. Do we have a seconder for those minutes?
I'd second, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Brackenbury. Right, all those in favour?
Yep. Full set of hands there, Chair.
All right, good. I won't ask for against or abstentions then. Right, thank you. That's moved. Thank you. And now we'll move on to the substantive elements of the evening's agenda. Item number 5, the proposed amendments to the National Planning Policy Framework. This will be given to us by Samuel Humphreys. Thank you, Samuel.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the purpose of this report is to consider the latest amendments to the National Planning Policy Framework and to agree a basis for the JPC's response. The latest amendments are being proposed in response to the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission report called Living with Beauty. A fuller review of the Mppf is likely to come in due course, depending on the outcomes of the Planning for the Future white paper, which members will recall we responded to back in October 2020. Key changes of most significance for the JPDU, and I suppose going forward for strategic planning become unitary, are set out in section 3 of the report. I won't reel through these individually, as there's quite a few points there, but I suppose the key areas to consider are amendments to chapter 1 on sustainable development, chapter 4 on decision making, and chapter 12 on achieving well-designed places. That's of the Mppf. But what we'll do now is just go through section 4 of the report, which is the most importance, which is about the significance of the implications for Northamptonshire. So I suppose I'll probably start off by saying that the proposed changes can probably be largely viewed as positive and can be largely supported by officers from an initial officer review anyway, with regard to strengthening key issues on design and the environment in particular. As mentioned, many of the key amendments to the Mppf are relating to improving design quality, and the implications for Northamptonshire in this in particular are set out in paras 4.2 and 4.5, sorry, 4.2 to 4.5 of the report. For example, proposals such as requiring local planning authorities to prepare design codes and guides is largely supported in principle, as these are seen as positive tools for encouraging good design. However, as raised in our response, the JPC's response to the planning white paper, consideration must be given to the resources required to actually create these design codes and guides, given the design capacity and resources available to Northamptonshire. Furthermore, I suppose on design, support is given to a new paragraph proposed for chapter 12 of the Mppf, which makes it clear that development not well designed should be refused, particularly those contrary to current planning policy. which obviously gives more weight to this issue come planning decisions. Just moving away from the design matters that are proposed, a key area that we think should be raised in a JPC response is highlighted in para 4.6 of the report, which is on proposed changes to para 53 of the Mppf on the use of Article 4 directions, which are used to restrict the use of permitted development rights in specific local areas. The new wording, we think, will result in councils finding it more difficult to implement such directions, should I say, where there are valid concerns about the impact of permitted development. The JPC response to the white paper raised concerns in a similar manner, that the increased use of permitted development could result in standardisation of development and could result in little control over design quality, which is obviously contrary to what the rest of the Mppf is trying to set out, as I've already talked about. I suppose finally, on a more positive note, in para 4.7 of the report, we view it as encouraging to see a greater emphasis on issues such as climate change and the environment within the proposed amendments of the Mppf. A key issue, again, the JPC responded to in relation to the white paper, where we saw really a lack of detail on this issue, which was obviously disappointing given the magnitude of the consultation. But like I say, it's encouraging that there's been some strengthened wording within the Mppf, particularly in chapters 1, 7 and 9 with regard to climate change, the environment and related matters such as sustainable transport. So I think I've probably talked about the key issues, the key significant issues for North Northamptonshire and the implications for us going forward. The deadline for the response is actually the 27th of March. So we do have a few more weeks to run on this to take into account further thoughts from the committee and obviously input from officers as well before the deadline. So that anything obviously can be added to the thoughts we've raised in section 4 of the report that I've just talked about. So I will leave it there, I think, and hand back to the chair for the recommendations and obviously any queries or comments. Thank you.
Right, yes, thank you, Samuel. Right, yes, obviously we'll get to the recommendation later, but before that, do we have any comments or questions from members?
We do, Chair. Councillor Brackenbury made it first.
All right, Councillor Brackenbury.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations, by the way, on your election to this august position.
Thank you.
Very well deserved, and welcome to it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. This is a very clear report, Samuel. Thank you very much for it. And it certainly interests me that we've got this whole discussion on from the BBC, which sounds like a rather splendid broadcasting organisation. Maybe you've gone a little bit too far. On living with beauty. Of course, beauty is, as they say, in the eye of the beholder. I welcome a lot of what's said in this. While I also very much welcome a genuine choice of transport modes in larger scale developments, one of the problems I have with it is that for a genuine choice of transport modes, we have to consider the hours of the day that people are going to need to utilize those transport modes, and especially in terms of public transport, and how they're going to access them, and also how those transport modes, especially in public transport, could be commercially viable. It's never easy. We're in a semi-rural environment, and certainly having completely responsive public transport throughout North Northamptonshire would be prohibitively expensive and difficult. I very much welcome at 3.6 the network of high quality open spaces and opportunities for sport and physical activity. I think that's absolutely terrific. It's something we've been working on quite hard throughout the district or throughout the area, as I think colleagues will know and agree. When we come over to the implications for Northamptonshire. I guess, Chairman, that so much of this is conflated with the Planning for the Future white paper, which has got serious issues in terms of the extension of permitted development rights and the reduction in local democratic decision-making on planning management as it's brought forward. And that is something that we are going to have to keep a very close eye on. Naturally, I know that the Planning for the Future white paper is a white paper, and that any legislation that's brought forward will no doubt depart from the text of that white paper, but it is something we need to work on. But more positively, at 4.2, certainly climate change, climate impacts and biodiversity gains, certainly climate has got to be something that is central to everything we do. I know that sounds like a cliche, but it is actually something that I believe Northamptonshire, as it emerges, is taking into consideration, and it's obviously been very much part of this committee's deliberations over many years. So finally, Chairman, the paragraph at 4.5 making clear that new development that is not well designed should be refused, I think does give some teeth to planning development, which is good. I mean, as I said earlier at the outset of my remarks, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and certainly what some people would call beautiful others may not. But to have solid, sensible, well-designed planning development is something I think that this committee would very much approve of. So thank you very much, Chairman.
Right, thank you. Do any officers want to comment on any of that before we move on to the next councillor?
Lost the words, Chairman.
All right, yes. Right then, David, who's next?
Councillor Mercer was up next.
All right, Councillor Mercer then, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Number of points. Overall, I think that the nodding towards beautiful buildings is superficial. I don't see any evidence of any teeth in it. It states, as Councillor Brackenbury pointed out in 4.5, that development should be refused if it's contrary to relevant planning policies. So in other words, it's not actually whether it's beautiful or not, or it's good design, it's whether it's contrary to policies. So as I said, the adherence to the principles of good design and beautiful buildings is only skin deep. It doesn't actually give any extra weight. I'm minded to compare it with supplementary planning guidance documents, where in the past planning inspectors made a point of snubbing us and saying they give little or no weight to such things because they've never been tested in a public inquiry, and therefore they're going to overrule any planning decisions that were refused on the basis of them. Sorry. Further, the government seems to be intent on removing the concepts of local policies. That seems to be the direction of planning for the future. If that's the case, where are the planning policies that are going to be violated by applications that we're supposed to be turning down in planning committees? If you don't have local planning policies, how can you be in conflict with them? Next, I can't see how we're going to have any local distinctiveness in local planning guidance because they don't want local planning policies. So effectively, it's just the national planning design guidance that they're talking about. So it strikes me that they're not actually offering us anything of any value as a local planning authority. We're going to be having being told, yes, you can refuse things if they are in conflict with these policies, except we won't allow policies in the future. And yes, you can have local design guides, but we're not going to have local policies, so all they can do is reflect national ones. What are we here for?
Right, yes, yeah, thank you. Are there any officers who would like to respond to those comments?
Chairman, if I can just sort of chip in to start with, and I know that when we come to Natalie's presentation around local design guidance, I think we'll be touching back on some of these issues. First of all, in terms of Councillor Brackenbury's comments, I felt most of those were supportive. We recognise the issue around transport choice and the implications in rural areas, and I think the committee's been consistent in making that point. I think in paragraph 72, I think is where you're referring to that, and it does specifically say larger scale development. So I think by their nature, those would tend to be the urban areas, or indeed in the rural area, something like Tresham Garden Village, which is clearly of a large scale development. It's imperative that that does provide for those alternative choices so that people don't automatically have to jump in their car. So I think that point is covered in the changes. In terms of Councillor Mercer's points, I'm a lot more positive about this than I think you are, Councillor. It's clear that there is a lot more national emphasis on design quality. As you rightly say, there's national policy being put in place, so that will have real teeth, and we will see the effect of that as appeal decisions start to mount up. But they're not saying to us that you shouldn't have local policies. What they're saying in the white paper is that you shouldn't have a lot of criteria-based policies that can be just dealt with at a national level. Local policies should be locally distinctive, involving local people in determining what sort of design is in keeping with the local area and is locally popular, are the sort of words that are used. So we are being encouraged to produce local design guidance, and also encouraged that will have significant weight when it comes to appeals. But we'll perhaps come back to this when we talk about the local design guidance.
All of our past experience is that whenever we do anything that's locally distinctive, it gets shot down by the planning inspectors on appeal. Why should we expect this to be any different? The government hasn't changed their spots.
Well, the National Planning Policy Framework, which is what we're talking about, is national policy. It has weight in planning decisions, so inspectors need to take account of it. And I think it will be an additional tool in the arsenal of the new authority when we're coming to argue for refusing an application on the grounds of design quality. And it is a real sea change to where we were perhaps a decade or so ago, when there was very little in national policy to support authorities trying to battle on design grounds. So understand your scepticism, but I think there is good support here for the sort of work that we're trying to do in North Northamptonshire. And I think we should support it. It may not go as far as you wish, but it's certainly a step in the right direction.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Councillor Mercer, are you happy with Andrew's response, or are you perhaps suggesting there should be an amendment to the JPDU response?
I remain sceptical about the likely result of these changes. I strongly suspect that we are going backwards, not forwards.
Right, but you're not suggesting any amendment to the response then?
I don't know what would be the appropriate amendment.
All right then. We'll obviously see the view of the rest of the committee now. Thank you. Right, David, who was next?
Councillor Griffiths, Chair.
All right, Councillor Griffiths then. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. And can I just thank officers again for the response to the white paper. I know it's some time ago, and I know we've all had lots and lots of meetings since, but I think it goes without saying what an excellent response that was, and thank you for that. And like Councillor Brackenbury, I'm all for living with beauty. I like to surround myself with a bit of it now and again, but on design and building for healthy life, have we picked up on the work already done or carried out by Sue Bateman and her team in Wellingborough? Because we had an excellent presentation on that. It may well be covered in Natalie's piece in a little while. And I don't see how this can be a backward step. It has to be a forward step. I share some of the concerns of Councillor Mercer, but post-COVID, the building for a healthier life is going to be even more important. And I think we need to take this forward and also work with the portfolio of adults, communities and wellbeing, because it's absolutely essential that this new authority that we're creating does not work in silos and works across those portfolios, because health and wellbeing and building strong homes is what we should all be aiming for. So I welcome the change of emphasis, and I think it's one that we've got to keep a very close eye on, and also very much test the response that Councillor Mercer was concerned about with regard to the inspectorate and the dangers therein. But I think it's a welcome step forward, and I support the approach, Chairman.
Right, thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Right, so who was next?
Councillor Jenny, Chair.
All right, yes, Councillor Jenny.
Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Jenny, you're muted.
Many years ago, I was told by one of my architect colleagues that surveyors were not supposed to have an opinion on aesthetics. So what does beautiful mean? Is it pastiche? Is it traditional? Is it putting modern looking buildings in traditional Victorian areas? All of that is absolutely, totally subjective. And while I really do think the government is being sensible about trying to give us teeth, it is so wishy-washy that it doesn't actually take us very, very further forward. So I've got major concerns about 4.4. I'd be happier if it was stronger in terms of definition. 4.6, the last part of 4.6, I think the JPC's response to the planning white paper is absolutely critical. That really must be supported. So I welcome that, and I think whoever picked up on that did a very, very good job. And then picking up on following Councillor Brackenbury, 4.7, the last line, a genuine choice of transport modes. Well, a genuine choice is very, very difficult in areas such as Northamptonshire. We've got the pleasure of e-scooters being rolled out in Rushton today, and it's caused absolute total havoc. You see the amount of Facebook comments that are floating around because people don't understand that sort of thing. But it is a transport mode, so that's quite interesting. But joking aside, in this part of the world, we depend upon the car, whether it's a petrol-driven car, a diesel-driven car, an electric-driven car, or in the future, a hydrogen-driven car. And we have got to make sure that our car people are well and truly looked after. And that, I suspect, will probably go against government policy at some stage when they actually give us the small print. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, thank you. Are there any officers who would like to respond to any of that?
Chair, I'll just
Yes.
come in if that's okay.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, just want to quickly, because I think now councillors Brackenbury, councillor Mersang, who else? Someone else as well. There's been a few. Basically, just wanted to reiterate. Oh, Councillor Jenny, sorry, just then mentioned about the beauties in the eye of the beholder, etc. And I completely agree with the comments about needing to strengthen that. So yeah, 4.4 of the report we have put in that we basically think that this term should be properly understood, properly defined, just basically to give it a bit more teeth. So I thought I'd pick that up because I think there's about 3 councillors now that have mentioned that. So I thought I'd say agree with the comments and yeah, something we should add to the response. So that was it, Chair. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Do you have any comments as well about what Councillor just mentioned there about the need for car transportation in this area and how potentially that might go against government policy?
I think, Chairman, if I come in on that, I mean that is national policy, and it's also the Joint Core Strategy is encouraging alternative modes of transport and to try and make cycling and walking the first choice for many trips, particularly the shorter trips. But the Joint Committee has always made the point that in practical terms, many people in Northamptonshire will be reliant on private cars, and so that is something which has to be designed into developments. But I don't think it really means that we should be arguing that people shouldn't be given a genuine choice of transport modes wherever possible, and obviously that's easier in our urban areas, easier on the larger developments. It becomes much more difficult in the remoter rural areas, and that's the flexibility that you have at a local level to apply those policies and apply different policies across the piece. But I don't think we'd recommend that the committee should be taking issue with the government's intention that we should be looking for alternative modes of transport and encouraging walking and cycling.
All right, thank you. Right, David, who's next then?
I think Simon wishes to come back in on this.
All right, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, nothing to add to what Andrew said about the JCS policy seeking to encourage a range of travel choices, but just to bring to members' attention, if you weren't already aware, that the England's Economic Heartlands Transport Strategy was published last Thursday. And we picked it up in the JPC response, but that has a policy and it specifically covers the issue of rural connectivity. And there's policy 29 within that document talks about working with partners to develop tailored solutions for smaller market towns and rural areas to improve access to services. So EEH are aware of that as a kind of strategic issue across its area. And obviously that transport strategy, as we move forward with the strategic plan, we'll have the opportunity to work with EEH to try and increase transport choices. So just to bring that to members' attention. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Simon. Right, are there any other councillors wishing to comment?
Councillor Mercer, Chair.
All right, yeah, Councillor Mercer.
Chair, listening to the other speakers has crystallised my feelings and my concerns about the government's papers. The concept of beautiful is so subjective, but so important. We can tell when we look at a beautiful building, we can tell when we look at an eyesore. The trouble is that there are shades of each of those, and the absolute definition of what is an acceptably attractive building, what is an unacceptable one, is very subjective. The government needs to put some sort of guidelines into its papers to indicate what the level of local interpretation is to be. If people locally say this is not a beautiful building, and by the local standards of what seems attractive it isn't, then that should be accepted. There is no global definition of beautiful, but I am certain that Planning Inspectorate will attempt to apply a global definition. They will have jointly trained together, and they will have an idea in their own mind of what is beautiful, but that will not match what the different communities in this country think of as beautiful. So the government needs to put together some sort of wording that allows local communities to have their own definition of beautiful, and for local planning management committees to apply that and not be judged on a separate and different national standard.
Thank you, Councillor Mercer. Perhaps if other councillors agree, maybe that's something that should be added to the response. Have you got anything to say about that, Andrew?
Well, we can certainly look at some wording, but I think when we talk about local design guidance, that's the direction of travel, that the government is encouraging local authorities to work with communities and produce locally distinctive policies that will have those teeth. But in the meantime, there are broad principles of good design, and those are now set out in national guidance, and local authorities can use those in shaping developments and, if necessary, in refusing developments. And I think
you've exactly got my point. National. That was the word you used, and you're correct. It's not local, and national guidance will give you a blanket design guide across the country and lose local distinctiveness, and what fits into the one particular vernacular will not fit into others. So you will end up producing poor design.
Yeah, through you, Chairman, the things I'm talking about at a national level are around form and layout and networks of transport connectivity, those sorts of issues, which have long been set out in national guidance. The more sort of stylistic design, local vernacular, that's something very much for local design guidance. I don't know, Natalie, if you want to.
I can't find where to put my hand up. Apologies, my hand's up. Yeah, I think, Councillor Mercer, I think maybe my paper or slightly covers a few of the issues you've raised and perhaps answers a couple of those, because the government is proposing a suite of policy, and what they've just launched in January is to take it from that national generic policy to locally specific. Now, there's lots of unanswered questions in terms of that, but certainly their intention is to drive down into locally specific guidance and policies. Why we took a slight direction change last year to develop more locally specific policies, because what we were doing was just regurgitating national level guidance. So we've considered this at great length. So I think what the government's trying to do is right, and I'll try and cover it in my paper, and perhaps you still have concerns, but in terms of the word beautiful, I totally agree with you. I think every design professional or any built environment professional, everybody's got concerns with the word beautiful. And I think every response that I've read or consultation response has raised that, because it's aesthetic, it's subjective. It is not synonymous with placemaking, which does follow sets of rules and rules of thumb and theory. This leaves it too open. So I think the wording's wrong, whether or not they'll change that. But what they're doing in terms of cascading more local policy to help local authorities is helping us, and I think it will lead to more locally specific policies. And I'll cover it in my paper, perhaps. So appreciate your concerns, but I think the government is going in the right direction. So the Mppf and the National Design Guide, that's not the end piece. There's a lot more to come or coming. So.
Thank you. Basically, if I'm reading you correctly, Natalie, what you're saying is the overall concept you think is right, even if perhaps some of the wording could be different, perhaps if they use a different word instead of beautiful or something like that.
Yes, I think like has just been raised, beautiful is an aesthetic issue, and placemaking is not just about the way things look, it's function, it's social, economic, environmental. There's so many different strands to making places. So I think design and beautiful, you could talk about that in specific buildings in a town centre, but I think when you're talking about the growth that we're talking about and placemaking, there are so many different layers and aspects. So it's leading you down the wrong path almost. And I think that's been the criticism, the way the government have launched that, because it's biased towards smaller areas, perhaps. It is very aesthetic. So I don't know whether they'll change it or not, but that's certainly been echoed across all the local planning authorities. I think that's a concern everybody's raised for the same reason.
So, Chairman, if I can perhaps just wrap up on that. We understand that point. It's been made by a number of members, so we'll make sure that that's emphasised when we put together the final response, which we'll seek to agree with Chairman and Vice Chairman, and we'll also look at the issue about transport as well that's been raised. So those are two issues that we'll take up in our final response.
All right, thank you. Do we have any other councillors wish to comment on this
Councillor
item?
Griffiths.
Yeah, Councillor Griffiths. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. And you know, I don't have a particular problem with the beautiful, unless you can come up with a better word. And beauty is aesthetically pleasing, isn't it? And pleasing the senses, and that's what I think we are trying to do. But the locally specific part of it is really important, isn't it? Because if we're talking about a fishing community in Cornwall, there is a different local specific required there, as opposed to a sustainable urban extension in Northamptonshire. So I think we've got to be realistic that the beautiful design fits in with the local scene. And I'm sure that will be covered in a little while. So I hope so anyway. Thanks.
Right, thank you. Do we have any other councillors wish to speak on this item, or shall we move to the recommendation?
Not apparently, Chair.
All right, thank you. I won't go through all the recommendation. It's here, item 6.1 on page 13. So I assume you've all read it. Do we have a proposer for this recommendation?
Councillor Brackenbury, Chair.
Right, thank you, Councillor Brackenbury. And do we have a seconder?
Happy to second, Chairman.
All right, thank you, Councillor Griffith. Yep, thank you. All right, all those in favour?
There's a full set of hands there, Chair.
All right, thank you. Right, if I'm correct, Andrew, what will happen now? You'll add in the comments, particularly the two themes we've heard tonight, into your response, and then the Vice Chair and I will look through that before you send it off. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chairman.
All right, thank you. Right, we'll move on to the next item then, Northamptonshire Local Design Guidance. And this presentation will be given to us by Natalie. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Okay, so this item is to update members and hopefully perhaps put your mind at rest a little bit, Councillor Mercer. So update members on the national policy design context and also on the progress we've made in preparing local design guidance, particularly significantly over the last 6 months or so. So just by way of background, this will overlap slightly with Samuel's presentation, but just to give you the comprehensive background, JPC have been involved, updated in the consultation on the changing national policy landscape in relation to design. And we held a number of workshops last year in September, and it was agreed, given the government's change in thinking and their emphasis on more locally specific design guidance, that we would review our action plan and we would look at preparing more locally specific design guidance and initiatives to implement the joint core strategy policies in a way that was aligned with the new government thinking. So the details of the workshops and the briefings and so on are outlined in that paper. I'm not going to intend on running through them this evening. So policy context wise, comprehensively, Samuel's covered the Mppf, the planning for future white paper, So that obviously sets the tone at the national level for design policies. The National Design Guide was very welcome, albeit slightly repetitive of other guides we'd have in previous years, but it set the government's intention that they were serious about design quality. So that was welcome, but how does this actually work in practice? How's this then implemented? So the government then promised further guidance, further policy, of which we've received in January. So we've had a package of design measures alongside the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission, which includes updates to the Mppf, as Samuel's covered, the National Model Design Code, first citing of that in January, and we are promised updates on DFT and the Manual for Streets 2 later in the year, so that's coming after. But the National Model Design Code is the key document to take the policy from the national level to guide local authorities to producing locally specific guidance. So that's their intention on the National Model Design Code. Consultations out at the moment ends end of March. What the government have done as part of this is they are intending on testing the design code because, as Councillor Griffiths just mentioned, the context, a rural community in Cornwall is very different to Northamptonshire. Everybody has different issues. We have different scales of development. So how can that then be applied to be useful for all areas? So what they're intending on doing is running a set of pilots. They've started that now. The pilot scheme is to test certain areas and certain design code elements so that it can then feed back and they can reform and amend the National Model Design Code so that it's going to be used and implementable. So that's happening at the moment. We discussed internally with CPOs whether or not the NNJPDU would go forward for a pilot, but it just, given the very tight timescale and the resource issues, it was concluded that it would be too prohibitive right now. But what we have done is we've committed to the very many MHCLG training events and programme of events to help local authorities, all disciplines, to understand and to hopefully be able to implement the code later on. So there's a lot of events and updates going on, and we have committed to keeping on track with that, to not only feedback to members, but also to help shape the future of our local guidance and our initiatives that we are enacting on the ground at the moment. The other positive thing is the pilot programme is likely to be run out again. There'll be a second run of pilots perhaps in the spring and then again in the autumn. So the government are very committed to testing this. I attended a session when they'd launched it. There's a lot of unanswered questions. It's great, it sets the tone, it's got good intentions, but the issues were, how does that then apply? How do we make that into locally specific guidance? How do you roll out codes for big areas? They're very timely. Who produces them, and so on and so forth? There's a long list of questions that are unanswered, and the government's intention is to run the pilot in order to help answer those questions so that it is usable. So it's still a little bit unknown at the moment, but we're keeping abreast with all of the training. All of the key organisations are running training at the moment. TCPA are running a webinar series, so is Design Midlands. So there's a lot of activity, a lot of debate, a lot of sharing. So we will just keep abreast of that and report back. So that's the package of measures they've launched in January. So in terms of the locally specific guidance, September last year, we agreed with members and CPOs to roll out Building for Healthy Lives as our key tool for assessing and shaping developments in Northamptonshire, already embedded in Joint Core Strategy Policy, the BFL 12, and part of the biannual monitoring that we do. So that all feeds into this BHL approach. So since September, we have delivered a series of BHL training events for officers and partner councils. We also provided a briefing session on the lessons learned from the monitoring that's happened earlier that year, sort of feed into the process. We have developed pro formas to actually use that on the ground in planning applications. And we have a further series of BHL training events planned for 2021 into the new authority. We've also we've welcomed feedback on that first session, so that officers and councils can tell us what they want training on. So it's very much a fluid process. So we're designing a training program around that. So that's the implementation of Building for Healthy Life. And we continue to use that as the thread underneath all our policies. So it will be the key thread that runs through the design charter, which I'll talk about in a moment. So I'll come to the recommendation at the end, but it's recommended that we continue to use that and we endorse that going into the new council. The second element of local design guidance, albeit fairly high level at the moment, is to provide a framework for the local guidance coming forward now, whether that's be area design codes or thematic design codes or thematic SPDs, this suite of documents. We have progressed with the work for the design charter, which initially it will set out the vision for the new council. It will set out a clear commitment to key design themes, principles and standards right the way across the piece. It will also set out a mandatory requirement for following a design process, which is vital for achieving better design outcomes. And it will also set out a service level agreement that will commit the authority to standards, mandatory requirements for applications, and also provide a service level agreement for the design service that will be provided, so that developers will be very clear from the outset what they need to do, the standards they need to meet, the application material they need to provide, and the process they need to follow. So that's a very, very important piece of work, and it's a real opportunity for the new authority to set out the stall, raise the bar right from the beginning, so that developers get the message. And I think that's going to set the tone going forward. So the charter we're progressing at the moment, and another very important thing to mention is it can only be produced through active engagement and co-production. So stakeholder engagement, ownership, commitment to it is vital. So the majority of the work is the engagement. It's not the writing of the document. It's probably going to be very short, very visual. So we've set out a programme of stakeholder engagement, but we are hoping that the new authority will provide some steer and direction on that when it after the 1st of April. So they're the two aspects of local policy. They need to be Northamptonshire based at the moment, and then local policies will build off that. Parallel to that then, so we will be developing other policies. As I mentioned, there'll be other suite of SPDs going forward, still scoping out, but that will apply for the new authority, thematic and area based. The charter, as I've mentioned. There's also trying to address skills resources or adequate resources and skills in order to meet what's in the white paper, what we're being asked to do, the volume of work that we've got, to really resource design so that we aim high and we can get high. So that's something that we're scoping out at the moment. And off the back of that as well, we're looking at training, not only BHL, but other training. I think we did that before COVID anyway, so that will continue. And I suppose all of the above is to really harmonise the processes so that the developers get a clear message from the outset about that NN means business in terms of design quality. So, I mean, that's how we've responded. It's very early days. We're still waiting with bated breath on the steer with the local design codes. I think that we in Northamptonshire, we have many codes. We've been doing it many years. It's nothing new. A lot of areas don't do them. So I think we're very far advanced in that sense. But there are certain things we can do to tighten it up. And as Councillor Mercer said, we do need to drive down into local areas and involve the community, and it needs to be more locally specific. But if we get the stall right, we get the basics right, then we'll be equipped to deal with that when it comes forward. So this next 6 months is going to be, you know, everybody trying to understand, respond, but I think we're steps ahead, to be honest, already by doing what we've done over the last 6 months. That's everything in the report.
Thank you, Natalie. Right. Do we have any councillors who wish to respond or ask questions?
We do, Chair. Starting with Councillor Brackenbury.
All right, yes, Councillor Brackenbury, thank you.
Thanks again, Chairman. And thank you very much, Natalie, for a very interesting and full presentation on the context behind local design guidance. Yeah, I mean, I really agree that there does seem to be some emphasis on good design, and that, as far as it goes, I very much recommend. Very much endorse. I'm particularly interested in the design charter and the design and placemaking in the local context. Of course, however, Northamptonshire is a pretty diverse place, and the little villages and the towns are varied, interesting. They have their own histories and their own heritage, and so placemaking in the local context isn't as simple as it seems, with the analogy from a Cornish fishing village to Northamptonshire, because Northamptonshire is itself fairly diverse. So I welcome all the engagement that's being suggested with all the various stakeholders, and also, lastly, it is going to be important that we do engage as much as possible with the development industry, partly so that we produce a coherent and consistent, as far as possible, set of requirements, and also that we demonstrate to the development world that Northamptonshire Authority, as it emerges, is going to apply certain standards, is going to expect certain standards on development, and is going to make sure that design policies do meet requirements that we here in Northamptonshire set, as well as with the more national planning policy guidance. So it's going to be quite an interesting journey on this. And here we are going to have to say, you know, draw a line in the sand to ensure that the industry and the planners are singing more or less from the same hymn sheet. It's a very interesting time to be around. It's a very interesting document. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brackenbury. Does any officer wish to respond to that?
Again, Chairman.
No. All right. Well, do any other councillors have any comments or questions? No, nobody else.
Yes, David was muted when he was trying to answer you.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, Councillor Jenny, Chair. Sorry, I thought I was unmuted, but turns out I wasn't.
You're trying my trick, David. Don't worry about it.
We've only been doing this a year.
Well, thanks very much, Natalie. You mentioned the word standards several times. I mean, I'm very proud of the way that this committee forced through the spatial standards in the Joint Core Strategy before the government recognised that those standards were of national importance and brought them through in the building regulations. So we have a track record of making sure that we go for quality. I'd just like to have confirmation that things like road widths and car parking policies are being maintained. And then there's a sort of a general question about how do we ensure that our planning management colleagues carry out these policies without looking for mitigation methods when a scheme comes up at planning and management. Because at the moment, there are certain frustrations amongst development management councillors that policies which they feel are written very clearly are being compromised by your planning management colleagues. And I just wonder, and I'm sure Rob Arbor's picking his ears up, how we actually get the policies that we set, quite rightly, interpreted in the way that we've intended them to be interpreted by planning management.
Okay,
I know that's a grenade, but it's one that needs to be asked.
I'll just take the first point in terms of the car parking standards, policies, etc. Certainly not going, well, the commitment to standards could be in the charter, but the detail is likely to come in a further manual or SPD. I have to say, I don't quite know how the county is going to play out at the moment. We have had one workshop with them and it wasn't overly helpful, but we certainly look to maintain or improve standards. But the government is, this sort of next stage is to launch LTL 120, looking at different modes of transport, cycle and walking, cycles specifically. And there is steer that local authorities need to provide or review their own policies in terms of parking and streets and so on. And I would say that's one of the fundamental issues we need to tackle as soon as we can. And that's something that's been raised all the way through the SPD work, as it has with other authorities. We're not alone on this. So all I can say is it's something that we will maintain and improve on. It's certainly something on our hot list. But how we actually play that out at the moment, I don't know. Andrew, do you have anything to add on that?
Not on that specifically, Natalie. I was going to comment on the how do we get these policies implemented point, and the issue I was going to raise there was simply that moving forward into the unitary authority, it will strengthen the team approach, because highways in particular will be part of the authority. So some of these discussions that have been sort of us and them, it will be just us getting our own house in order. And in relation to the development of policy, I know Natalie works hard to engage development management colleagues in the formulation of those policies, so they will be involved in the preparation of the design charter and the detailed guidance and all the training that she's set out. So it's not a case of design expertise will sit in a bubble with Natalie. It needs to be developed and supported throughout the authority, so that and not just officers but members as well, so that every planning decision is taking account of the design aspects of that decision.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think picking up on that, Andrew, come the 1st of April, or whenever is suitable, it would probably be a good idea to have some member training on Natalie's work, because you know, I'm conscious that she's done an awful lot, all of which is highly technical and exceedingly good, but I suspect it's not as known as widely as it should be by members.
I think all councillors here would probably agree. We'd like everyone all members in the authority to be able to have, well, certainly the knowledge of what's going on and the opportunity to pass on any input. Councillor Jenny, I wanted to ask something so I can get more clarification. You were mentioning about planning managers maybe mitigating some of the ideas behind this. Were you perhaps saying you might perhaps have a concern that even though we've got these standards, that developers might say, well, it's not viable for us to do our development if we have to adhere to all these higher standards. Was that something you were bringing out in your comment?
I will bring those comments out in my comments because because I think you've extracted them quite nicely, Councillor Dady. I mean, I seriously believe that some of the viability studies that are put in front of our officers are massaged to support the applicant's case. Let's put it that way. And certainly I know, because I write them, or I used to write them before I retired, how easy it is to massage them. So yes, I think, quite frankly, if somebody comes along and says the scheme isn't viable, but please can we avoid a section 106 to make it viable, my reaction is make it viable or don't build it. You don't build something for the sheer fun of it if you're not going to make any money out of it.
Right, thank you. Does any officer wish to comment on that?
Probably not.
The few developers that might.
Yes.
Could I say, Chair? Chair, could I just say, I think it will be very interesting for all of us when they start this pilot situation, so we can actually go and see it firsthand and get involved in it, because as indicated, there's so much to get involved in on this one. And I think the unitary authority has got to change things, not go along the same old road, but actually look at it in a different light so we can go forward together. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, this is a good opportunity to take stock, if you like, and maybe restart on in terms of some of our priorities. So that's a good comment. Right, do we have any other councillors wish to have any input into the discussion?
Councillor Mercer, Chair.
Right, yeah, Councillor Mercer.
Thanks, thank you, Chair. I've got a number of points to make. The first one is I've been on planning committees for about 15 years. I've been involved in the determination of about 1,000 applications, I reckon. And I don't recall a single occasion where we turned something down on the basis of a policy and an SPD and it was up and the refusal was upheld on appeal. In every single case I can recall, the inspector dismissed our argument on the basis that SPDs, in his views, carried zero weight. If you're trying to put something into an SPD, you're going to have to find some way of making the planning inspectorate take note of them. So far, I've never seen it happen once. Right, next, concerning standards and in particular the Building for a Healthy Life, which I note is not a government document. Only 10 days ago, I was involved in the determination of a planning application where the block of flats were going to be facing onto a noisy, busy, polluted street. And the officer said that it was okay for the residents as long as they kept all their windows shut. Now, if that is not mitigation of a policy, I don't know what is. To say that you've got to keep your windows shut permanently or else you're going to be breaching the healthy lifestyle rules is ludicrous. But that is what was put in front of the committee. Right, next, following on something from what Councillor David Jenny said, I dealt with an application about 10 days ago where there was no section 106, no contribution to affordable housing, and we were told that we could not use any of that as a reason for refusal because if they had to make any contribution, it would make the development non-viable. The fact that someone's got to pay for the school places, for the GP surgery capacity, etc., which basically comes down on the public purse instead, seemed not to be a relevant matter. As it happens, the planning committee threw it out, which I think was very, very wise, very admirable. But that shows how, unless the government endorses building for a healthy life and its ideas and makes them government policy, we're not going to be able to use those sort of concepts in development management, because as far as the officers are concerned, it's merely advisory and not defensible on a planning appeal. And if you can't defend it, it's not worth having.
And just to come back on that, no, you're absolutely right. It isn't a government publication, but it's been endorsed by Homes England and the NHS. And the rewrite, the re-edit, was to emphasise health and well-being. I don't think they knew about COVID, but that's the direction they were going in. And it does form policy, and it has informed the place shaping policies in the joint core strategy. In terms of the government using it as their own, they are actually going to reference it, aren't they? In the I'm just trying to find my notes. That has been raised previously, and they are going to mention it in let me just find it.
I think it's in the
Mppf revisions that Samuel said. Yeah.
The Mppf, yeah. But what the BHL principles are echoed with the National Design Code. They're not saying anything different. They're perhaps going a little bit more into detail. But what it allows us to do is quantify development. That's why it's a very useful tool. Not saying it's the only one, but it is backed up with government policy. So they're all building on each other. So that's why, because it's been endorsed and it's used as already as a monitoring tool to the BFL, that it makes sense, and it's a recognised industry standard tool anyway. In terms of using it on appeal, I don't know the answer to that, but I would say that its foundation is the national policy context. So, and then also local policy in the joint core strategy. Anything else to add, Andrew, Simon, in terms of weight?
just to say, it's the issues that we talked about in the report that Samuel presented. So the proposed revisions to the Mppf to incorporate reference to BHL, and also to strengthen the development management refusing policies that don't comply with local design policies. Well, that national approach in a way is catching up with the policies that are in the current JCS, so that national context will strengthen the implementation of our local policies. So through the appeal process, once the revisions that we've said we're supportive of are enacted in the Mppf update, that will, like I said, the national policy is catching up with our local policy, and will strengthen it in the, certainly you would imagine, the weight that inspectors give to the local policies.
Well, as it currently stands, even if you're not allowed to open your windows at any time in the entire occupation of the building, that's considered acceptable.
I think that's also environmental health issue as well. I mean, we've had sites with those issues, and noise and pollution is an environmental health issue that should be raised. And
it was an environmental health officer who made the recommendation.
Right. Okay. Yes. Well, that's not great.
Right. Does any other councillor wish to speak on this item?
Yes, we've still got several to go, Chair. Councillor Tebbett.
Right, Councillor Tebbett, yes.
Thank you, thank you, Chair. Totally endorse the recommendations, and they should be passed through to the new authority for immediate adoption in May. There's one particular area that I think is not referred to within the design criteria that is fairly critical, and that is the criteria in relationship to open spaces. I believe we need to refresh our supplementary planning documents in this area. I think we've got a number of them within the various different existing authorities, but they need to be pulled together to a new supplementary planning document. There's one particular issue that has risen its ugly head at recent times, and that is the adoption of open space, or the provision of and the adoption of open space into new estates. And the fact that the new owners are required in many cases now to pay for that ongoing maintenance, which was not the case in the past. There is a requirement within a lot of the documentation that the issues should be passed on or referred and adopted by the local authority, and that the payment for the ongoing maintenance should be made in monetary terms to the local authority to undertake that work. So I would propose that we put a third item, an item C, in there, which reads something to the effect of produce a supplementary planning document for our open spaces, resolving the issues of adoption and ongoing maintenance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. How do other councillors feel about adding to the recommendation like that? Do we have any comments about that?
Yes, Chair. Yes, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Councillor Walters. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I think Councillor Tebbett's talking about an amenity charge for the residents of those houses. Is that right? Because
absolutely right.
Wellingborough, is that right?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. It's a grey area one, as far as I'm concerned. I've had many complaints over many years because Wellingborough built in the 60s some council estates, and they added that to the rent situation, and a lot of residents don't like that idea, where they see other parts of the town, I suppose, having their grass cut, but they've got to pay for their own grass to be cut. It does, as a tenants and residents, it's not a happy thing for them to do. But I know where you're coming from. The good thing about that is that it does maintain it to a high standard, and it keeps the grass cut short. You know what I mean? They're rather being overgrown. But so there are fors and against it. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm not against you, but all I'm saying to you, it is a grey area in some towns. I'm not quite sure what it's like in Kettering, but I know Wellingborough, they do have some concerns about it. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mike. Thank you.
That's all right. If I could perhaps give a couple of comments on that as well. We would want everywhere maintained to a high standard, not just whether people are paying separately for it or not, I would have thought. But I know certainly in my experience, people think, well, why am I paying my council tax and then I've got to pay this in addition for what I should expect to be paid in my council tax? And certainly in one case I know of where there's an estate where this happens, and it might be the case everywhere, it's an open-ended thing. Residents have to sign up for something, not knowing what the price might go up to in the future. And it certainly has caused a lot of trouble. So I don't want to influence what other councillors might say, but it certainly is maybe something we want to at least look into. Does any other councillor wish to speak on that particular thing before we continue with the wider debate? Yes.
Could I just make a comment? I think it's something we can take away and look at, and obviously talk with colleagues about. You haven't got a report before you this evening about that particular issue, and I think before deciding you definitely want an SPD on a particular issue, which is clearly something for the new authority. I think we'd like to give you or the new authority a full report on it. So can I suggest that you leave it with us as an issue that you want investigated, and we'll bring forward recommendations in relation to the local development scheme and supplementary planning documents as part of that package.
Through the chair, more than happy for that. More than happy for that to take place, because I think it also really needs to look at road adoption as well. So it's an adoption issue as well as the ongoing maintenance.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Chair. More
Chair.
than happy for it to become a piece of work that you take away and look at. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just come in just to further to what Andrew has just said. Thank you, Chair. No, just to say that in the work that we've been doing with colleagues in the planning policy teams and the LPAs as we move into the new council, the approach to open space has been flagged, and we're aware that Corby are proposing to do an SPD. Kettering are proposing to do an SPD, both of these hooking off their Part 2 local plans. So the opportunity to harmonise the approach as we move into the new council is something that we're very much aware of. And I don't want to start introducing the item 7 report, but in terms of the scope of the NN strategic plan that is set out in Appendix 1 to item 7, we have flagged in terms of place shaping sustainable development that it may be necessary to harmonise the approach to open space sports provision across Northamptonshire and the broad criteria for the delivery of this. So just to echo what Andrew said in response to Councillor Tebbett's comments, that we're very firmly aware of the need to explore and harmonise the approach as we move into the new council. Thank you for, and apologies for interjecting.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Yeah, I think perhaps were any of us to get elected into the new authority, I'm sure this is something we'd be happy to discuss further then. So, thank you. Right, perhaps moving on to the wider issues then, rather than that specific one. Are there any other councillors who wish to speak?
Many more to go, Chair.
All right, good.
We have Councillor Griffiths next.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'm very much in favour of this paper and this concept of building for healthier life. I think it's excellent progress. I like the idea of streets as opposed to roads. I think it has to be the way forward. I like the idea of building homes and communities as opposed to building houses. And I also think it's essential that we connect new and existing habitats together, linking villages with footpaths and cycle routes. So I think all those are excellent suggestions. I don't know if an officer might wish to give us some idea of, are the major house builders buying into this concept? Is it something that they see as a benefit to getting planning applications approved, or is it something that they will do with reluctance, because obviously it will affect the viability of some schemes when you look at some of the exciting stuff in there. But lastly, on the health and well-being front, this has to be the way forward as we come through COVID-19. So I fully support it, as the recommendations are, especially as we've said that we can look at Councillor Tebbett and Malcolm Watts's concerns about that particular aspect. So if anybody else could second it, I would be happy to propose the recommendation at 5.1, Chairman.
Thank you for that. I think we do have other councillors who wish to speak before then, but thank you for your proposal.
I'd like to know, if possible, Chairman, to if the major house builders, and blimey, we've got nearly all of them in Northamptonshire at the moment, in one way or another. I'd love to some sort of feel for if they are.
I can answer you initially from my day job and dealing with all the house builders on the various schemes and garden communities. Are you relating to BHL, or are you just relating generally, Councillor Griffiths, to placemaking, good placemaking?
To BHL, because I think it's the way forward. So I'm just hoping that the major house builders are buying into
it. Well, BHL, the National Model Design Code, so on and so forth, all of those key principles are what design professionals do anyway. BHL is ingrained in my brain. I've done it for years. BHL is a tool to communicate and quantify design, and the amber and reds and the greens is just a really simplistic way of saying it doesn't come up to scratch, but it uses the basic principles of good design that are echoed, and you go back 20 years, are in the by design and compendium and all the CABE documents, so nothing's changed there. So as an urban designer, that's what I do every day when I deal with developers, and the message is always a well-designed scheme will always add value, and it will have longevity. That's the key message, and it will be sustainable, etc., etc. The BHL tool is starting to be used more internally. So our rollout of training was to get case officers up to speed so that we could use it to basically say to a developer, you need to address these points. Again, quite simple, but often that will take a scheme from an average scheme to a good scheme. And when we looked at the BFL assessments last year, that did identify there's a lot of schemes in NN that are just not quite hitting the mark, but just with a few extras, they would be good schemes and they'd be getting the green lights. So again, simplistic, but what we are hoping to do in the charter and going forward into the new unitary, that BHL becomes an industry standard for the externals, stakeholders and the developers, and they recognise that, and they have to use that perhaps as part of their design and access statements or underpinning their codes to say, this is the scheme we propose, and it meets, they've done their own assessment. We haven't quite got there yet. We're trying to do the internal first. So, but I would say that when you work with developers quite closely on schemes, for example, Stanton Cross, very heavily involved in that for the last year, they do start to work with you, but it takes time, it takes resource, and they do then understand that, you know, you can get what you want in terms of design, and they can get what they want, and so it's just a two-way process, really. But the BHL is to ensure that if there's no design resource given to a scheme, a planner can pick it up, a developer can say, I've done this, and there's that common dialogue about whether a scheme is good or not, because it's been scored. So I would say that definitely developers will buy into it, because it's a system that's going to help get them an approved scheme. So I can't see why they wouldn't, to be honest. But that's my experience.
That's a very useful answer. Thank you ever so much for that.
Right, thank you. Who's next then, David?
Councillor North, Chair.
Right, yeah, Councillor North.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points. It's been, this is a very interesting debate, and I agree with everything that's been said. I certainly support what Councillor Griffiths just said in relation to support and the whole concept of this. I've still got the original document, which is just slightly larger than the pack we had for the authority meeting last week. But even the slimmed down version is positive. But I also support Councillor Mercer's point in relation to, this is all very good, and we are in the depths of March, and we have all been locked in for years. So this is not a doom and gloom evening. But you're absolutely right. Why wouldn't they support it, Natalie? But the whole point is profit. And great design, is really good. Having great design estates, having great principles behind it all, having design codes, etc. But first, I absolutely agree with Councillor Mercer. I don't think we've ever won an appeal on the design principle in relation to the inspector. So that is very worrying that we can do all the excellent work we wish to have great designs. And I'm not knocking any of this. It's all very laudable. And especially what everybody's been saying, including yourself, including Martin, some great schemes, great designs, and we've been trying to do that with the, the Rushton East project, which is behind Stanton Cross. But when it comes down to profit, and profit is squeezed, if we're in a recession period after COVID and we end up going to appeal, you know, if we haven't got the government behind us or the government's inspectorate behind us to support us, if we throw something out on appeal, then I'm absolutely behind Councillor Mercer. We can do all the wonderful work we do here tonight, and I'll say I'm absolutely not knocking it, but if it comes down to money and profit and the government's backing it, we still end up with rabbit hutches, and we still end up with not the tree-lined streets that I've been asking for good 15, 20 years, and good design, because profit always wins through, and that's where we're at. But so I'm really trying not to knock it, because everything is great what we're trying to do. It's just what we need behind it. And there's the point Councillor Mercer said, if we go to appeal and throw something out because it hasn't met the design code, what we actually need is somebody to back it and say we adhere to this design code that this local authority area is trying to achieve. Otherwise, you know, we end up carrying on with the rabbit hutches and small design and poor design and all the social issues we've had and we have across the country. That was a point. The other thing is a question, and I'm quite happy to take it elsewhere with Rob, Harbour and so forth. But for a month at least, I have got enforcement under my portfolio for Northampton Exec. And one point you mentioned earlier, Natalie, was about standards in general to David Jenny's comments about, and parking was an analogy used there. And I think what throws a question to me is what we do in the April period. It's probably not a question for you, but perhaps some officer may answer, is in relation to enforcement of what we do during the period of April on whose standards we're adhering to. Because if we're not getting much truck with the county, as you indicated earlier to Councillor Jenny in relation to parking standards and enforcement, where does that leave us during the PERDA period? It may be not for this committee, Chair. I fully appreciate that, but that's just raised a concern for me of actually what we're enforcing against during the first month of the new authority, because I know these recommendations for the authority, not for the shadow authority. So even if they do take these on board, Chair, it's not going to be till April time when we're right in the middle of the new organisation, not the shadow. So that just raises a separate concern for me. Thank you. And it's safe. If it's not for this committee, then maybe someone can get back to me elsewhere. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Does anyone want to respond to that?
Andrew?
Yeah, Chairman, just I think it's not one for this committee. So if we can, we've registered it, and we'll come back to you.
All right, thank you. Right then, David, who's? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, just quickly in response to your viability question. I've never worked on any scheme in the last 25 years that someone hasn't called a viability card. But I do completely appreciate, and there's some areas where there is a real viability issue. And as a designer, I do think that well-designed schemes add value, and they often can, but there needs to be lots of filters in order to stop a developer arguing against quality. So we water down the quality that we want, and we end up with some basic scheme. All of the different mechanisms and tools and policies we're talking about creates that strong platform, including a charter to lay out the stall about commitments, the processes, which is absolutely key, because you can still have the same value scheme at the end of the process. If they followed a process of design, perhaps particularly through pre-app, you can negotiate and compromise and discuss design issues to try and raise the bar. That's my experience anyway. So there's so many different factors that can influence quality design outcomes. But I do think the viability, again, new authority, new opportunity, it needs some strong leadership with the developers. I don't know whether they grind you down and they let you, they do things very last minute so that you have to accept. I don't know what the answer is, and potentially it's a long conversation for outside this forum, but certainly I try and put that aside, because at the end of the day, one councillor's comment, if there's no fun in doing a development, it's going to make some profit. So, is the viability argument actually genuine? So I tend to park it and just try and do the best I can. So
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Right, David, who's next then?
Councillor Scarborough has been incredibly patient, Chair.
All right, Councillor Scarborough then.
Thank you, Chairman. 4 very quick points. First of all, this is obviously worthy of support. It is much pared down from what this committee would have wished to see, but it's absolutely better than no work in this area. That's quite clear cut. I think it will work a great deal better, as a number of councillors have said, if we have overt government support and national codification around design standards. That's not within our gifts, so I think we have to do the best we can. I'm confident that the coming together of the unitary authority will enable us to deal with the silo mentality we have seen from some partners at county, most notably NCC Highways. We will be able to deal with the perversity of some of their approach in these areas relatively easily. But the danger I really fear lies with ourselves, or perhaps I should say our successors, talking to the members here, if we don't get the whole council to commit to what we're seeking to do in this area. And that for me is absolutely fundamental. At 4.8, it talks about all sorts of splendid things we should do. But somebody mentioned leadership being crucial. And I think that's absolutely right, because this is an authority that exists in a space which is under huge development pressure. We're about to do the last paper, which describes exactly some of that pressure that's about to come on. And unless our leaders, among those who are successful in getting elected to the new authority, insist that this stuff is as non-negotiable as they can make it, and don't simply rush to growth, then this is worthless. At that point, I return to Councillor Mercer's deeply depressing view of the world. So I honestly think the biggest danger to us, funny enough, is ourselves if we don't get this right, and we don't get buy-in for this with the entire leadership of the council.
Thank you, Councillor Scarborough. As I said before, I think all the councillors present would agree that we'd want all other councillors to have an input into this and to adhere to these standards. Or I think that would be the case. Right. Do we have any other councillors who wish to comment, or do any of the officers wish to comment on what Councillor Scarborough said?
We have one final councillor. Councillor O'Hara has arrived in the meeting from our KBC Planning Committee. So,
all right, yeah, I think that would be good to have as Councillor Scarborough was speaking, I was thinking we can sometimes have, I've noticed being on both committees, where local plan is almost working independently of the Planning Development Control Committee, and the Development Control members maybe don't know some of what's involved in the local plan type schemes. So it would be good to have a planning councillor to speak on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm a bit ended up being 3 very contentious applications. We refused all 3. I absolutely love Build a Healthy Life, and I think what's imperative in it and what we see on planning is that far too often builders will come forward and, like has already been said, they'll say it won't be viable, and it's always going to be viable because they know how much they pay for the land make on each plot. So with what's been said, what it does concern me is that we can't, unless, and it's somehow like we say it goes, or it's put into building regs, people won't, and we can't use it as a means to refusal at the planning stage, which I would love to do on most occasions. I think what's imperative is that we start using it and start using more eco products, and then let's say in regards eco products, say the grants, more developers use those, the price won't come down, therefore they'll always come back and say not cost effective, because unless the mass produce, the price doesn't come down. And think it's going to be more a call for people to be looking after this planet because of COVID. We're going to get people actually want developers to do, and if the marketplace is asking us to do, and we also have the planning legislation in place to be able to do it, then it will help us and our planners, and it will help the planning committee to actually bring forward homes fit for purpose, which is what we're actually talking about, and areas that are fit to actually live in and enjoy, because there's proper open spaces with trees and an area that it support our physical and mental health. And I think what we're seeking to start, and I hope that our, whoever comes after us can actually bring this forward further. So thank you for bringing it to us tonight, and I fully support it.
Right, thank you. Right, is that David? Do we have any other councillor wish to speak?
No, we do not, Chair, unless another hand goes up.
All right, no, I'm happy for another hand not to go up, considering the time. So, right, I think we'll move to the recommendation then, as
Can I
is.
just add one suggestion?
Oh yeah, yes, Councillor Mercer, yes.
We had an extra clause saying that we would like the government to publicly endorse and adopt the building for healthy life document, so it becomes an official government document rather than one just supported by the NHS and Homes England. Because if it was officially a government document, that would strengthen our hand a lot.
Right, thank you. Perhaps Andrew could comment on this. I don't know that we need it necessarily as another point in the recommendation, but perhaps the paper as it is could be amended, and then we would adopt the paper with those comments in, if that's what councillors want. What do you think, Andrew?
Well, I think one way of dealing with it would be in the response on the Mppf, where it's talking about mentioning building for a healthy life. That's where we could say that's not enough to just to mention it as a tool. It would be important to endorse it. So we'll cover it off in that if members are happy.
Thank you. Is that all right with everyone?
Very happy with that, Chair.
All right, good. All right, well, we'll move to the recommendation as is then. Somebody, was it Councillor Waters? Somebody did propose the recommendation.
Proposed it, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Griffiths.
More than happy to second it.
Who was that?
Councillor Tebbett, Chair.
Sorry?
Councillor Tebbett, Chair.
All right, Councillor Tebbett. All right, thank you. All right, then, so we've had a mover and a seconder. All those in favour?
Agreed.
That's a screen full of hands, Chair.
All right, good. All right, that recommendation is passed. We now move on to the final item, which will be given to us by Andrew and Simon. This is item number 7, the strategic planning update, page 21.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll try and whiz you through this report as quickly as possible, and Simon will chip in along the way. It's effectively a handover report dealing with strategic planning issues, because obviously the new council will become the strategic planning authority. The proposals before you are that a recommendation goes forward to the new council that the strategic plan for Northamptonshire is formally commenced this year, and that the time scale for that should be aligned with the work that's taking place on the ARC spatial framework, which I'll tell you a little bit more about. And we've included a draft scope and timetable for this strategic plan in Appendix 1 of the report. I'm going to take most of the report as read, but just pick out a few bits. In section 3, we're talking about the national context, and I start off by referring to the planning white paper, and obviously the changes coming down the road for that. But at 3.3, make the point that many of those changes will require legislation, and they're therefore some way off, probably several years away. So we're going to have to get on with this strategic plan based on current legislation and what we know and what the new council wants to embrace of the changes coming through. So I won't dwell too much on the white paper. The more important bit is in relation to the Oxford-Cambridge ARC spatial framework. And you'll know that the government produced a policy paper on this on the 18th of February, so a week or so ago. And that the report sets out some of the content of that. It's not a consultation paper, it is a government policy paper, but obviously members may have some views on that. So we've set out paragraphs 3.6 onwards of the report, the content of that. The government set out a timeline for producing the plan, how it wants to engage communities, and the broad content of the document. At 3.10, we've summarised why the government thinks a spatial framework is necessary in order to coordinate planning across the area. They talk about better spatial planning, better targeted public investment, more certainty for investors and businesses, and to allow communities a role in shaping the growth, because it is recognised that this area of the ARC has accommodated very significant growth, and it will continue to do so. So the choice is, and the government's view is, do you try and plan that and accommodate that in the most sustainable way, or let it continue to happen ad hoc and put pressure on the environment and on inadequate infrastructure. So you've got the paper, so I'm not going to tell you what it's talking about. For us, there were no real surprises, and there is a lot to support in the document, particularly the emphasis on the environment and the environmental standards and part of that design issues, and also the emphasis on the economy and the levelling up agenda, which could really be an important part of our case for investment. And housing, the housing numbers, which have been the contentious bit, gets relatively little said about it, but clearly that's going to have to be dealt with down the line. Timescales set out in the report, incredibly challenging. They're talking about producing a vision for consultation this summer and doing some engagement with partners prior to that. Then an options consultation in spring 22 and a draft document in autumn 22. No definite end date for the finish of that, and I suspect that's because they're still working out whether there's going to be any examination process, independent testing of the document. So in terms of implications for North Northamptonshire, well, we work officers, we welcome the policy paper because it's actually crystallised a lot of things that have been talked about and kicked around by leaders and others over a number of years. The timescale is, as I say, incredibly challenging, but we've produced a timetable for the strategic plan that tries to fit in with that. At 3.20 of the report, we talk about the importance of us officers and members having a very active involvement in the development of the ARC spatial framework, so that North Northamptonshire maximises the opportunities and benefits that this will bring. We already are very involved in it. We've got a seat at the on the working group that's going to be working with MHCLG team bringing this forward. But we mustn't underestimate the amount of time and resource that this is going to tie up and for the new council talking about 3 major consultations in the space of 18 months. So we need to bear that in mind. So I think that's all I wanted to say. I'll hand over to Simon, if you could be really quick, and then I'll wrap up with the conclusions of the report. Over to Simon.
Thanks, Andrew. Just a very quick overview of section 4 of the report, which talks about the scope and timetable of the North Northamptonshire Strategic Plan, or I'll abbreviate it to Nnsp. At 4.2, I think an important thing to bear in mind is that once the government publishes its response to the white paper, we'll need to give further consideration to the format and structure of the Nnsp. Earlier in the report, in section 3, the government is clear that the white paper reforms are not a reason to delay plan making, and as Andrew touched on, that's why we are recommending that formal work commences. In terms of the scope of the Nnsp, which is set out in Appendix 1, you'll see the feedback from the partner LPAs that has informed the proposed scope and identified areas where the approach in the JCS could be strengthened. And just issues to bring to your attention include having climate change at the heart of the plan, a stronger vision for employment to strengthen and diversify the economy, and town centre regeneration taking into account of policy changes and social economic implications, including COVID-19. And these are all issues that members have raised at recent committee meetings and have come up in the discussion tonight. It's also worth emphasising, we've talked about the JCS tonight, that the proposed scope focuses on updating and strengthening the policy approach in the JCS, that our ongoing appeals monitoring is showing that it's still working well. Obviously, Appendix 1 of the report, para 1.7, sets out the scope of the proposed scope of the Nnsp, and as we go through the plan making process, we may refine this approach subject to changes in national guidance and consultation feedback. I'm not proposing to. We can obviously take questions on the detail in Appendix 1. Not proposing to dwell to go through Section 4 in any more detail. Worth touching on the evidence base discussed at paras 4.7 to 4.8. We're currently in the process of finalising consultancy briefs in relation to climate change and a housing and economic needs assessment, snappily known as the HENA. And we're also proposing, as we set out in paragraph 4.8, a call for sites to be undertaken in the summer. And Andrew touched on the timetable for the Nnsp that's set out in Appendix 1 of the report and its relationship with the ARC spatial framework. I think one final point before I hand back to Andrew is to reference para 4.11 of the report, and members will remember the debate when we discussed the proposed changes to the standard methodology last October. As para 4.11 sets out, it talks about LHN and it's the influence on the Nnsp, which will obviously be 5 years old in July. As you'll no doubt be aware, government confirmed before Christmas that it's not proceeding with the revised standard method formula, and this is very positive news for Northamptonshire. It reflects the strong representations made by the planning authorities and the Joint Planning Committee, and that provided that Northamptonshire can continue to maintain a 5-year housing land supply, it should reduce the risk of speculative planning applications while the Nnsp is being prepared. I think that's an important point. It reduces that risk as we progress with the timetable that's laid out in Appendix 1. But happy to take questions on the detail of the scope and timetable at the end, Andrew. Now, thank you.
Okay, Chairman, very briefly, that takes us to the conclusions, where we're making the point that the strategic plan is going to be a key statutory document for the new council, and the incoming council will be able to really shape that. But the recommendations coming from this committee with its experience, I think will set the council in good stead. And I've done a sort of wrapping up of the Joint Planning Committee in the last few paragraphs. Obviously been in existence since 2005. Many of you have been at probably every single meeting along with myself over that period, and yeah. you've achieved a great deal and received a lot of recognition from government from doing that. In the last paragraph, when I wrote this, I wasn't sure what the new arrangements were going forward, but you've obviously agreed, the shadow authorities agreed, that there will be a planning policy executive advisory panel to oversee the preparation of development plans reporting to the executive. So I think that will be the son or daughter of the Joint Planning Committee, and should ensure that members continue to shape the policy agenda for the council going forward. So, Chairman, that just would lead on to the recommendation at that point.
Thank you, Andrew and Simon. I'm sure there'll be some councillors who wish to speak. Who wants to go first?
Councillor North, Chair.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the tiers are there in many ways, Andrew. Thank you for your comments. I'm sorry I missed the beginning of the meeting, but I would certainly want to mention my thanks to yourself and all the staff certainly the last 10-12 years I've been involved in this committee. And I think if it wasn't mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, I really do think we've done an excellent job in shaping the direction through the Part 1 plan for the for the area. And if that wasn't done at the beginning, Chairman, I would certainly like to minute thanks, certainly on behalf of East Northampton Council and hopefully the members, in relation to what we've managed to achieve in that period of time. Real congratulations, I think, to everybody in working together. I said the tiers in many ways, Chair, not to end on a depressing note, but it's welcoming in the future direction in relation to the paper. But I have to say, Chair, I'm very concerned with the ARC paper. It's back to government control. It's very top down. It's very not just controlling planning areas, but obviously in the environment and the economy as well. I think it actually does reduce local choice, and I'm very concerned for the strategic plan going forward in relation to how much shaping we actually are going to be able to do in relation to the top down from the government. I appreciate we are pretty close to running out of time, Chair. Otherwise I would speak for a lot longer on it. It does say in the paper that we welcome this. That would be okay in policy guidance, but we're only just short of a public inquiry in relation to this framework, and it's going to be very, very very put upon in relation to the ARC area and what we do. And it is a shame from my point of view to end on this part, my earlier comments, but actually I am very, very concerned with the future going forward in relation to our freedoms of what we will be able to deliver for our residents of Northamptonshire, rather than actually top down and determined from hierarchy from the government, because they seem very much in control mode, which is, in my view, a real shame in relation to place shaping. So I would speak for longer, but I appreciate we've been going for 2 hours already. But closing comments. But finally, again, thank you to all the staff and yourself, Andrew, from East Northampton's point of view in relation to joint planning unit. And it's a very good shame. It's a shame to see it being wrapped up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor North. What I think I might do is take other comments from other councillors, and perhaps officers can comment on any general themes we have relating to councillor comments. Right, David, who's next?
Councillor Mercer, Chair.
Right, Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to endorse much of what Councillor North has just said, and specifically I'm very concerned that the housing needs definitions are totally subjective by some consultant and rarely objective in terms of actually going around and finding out what people actually really need. They are needs that are imposed from outside, and I'm concerned about that. Now, looking at specifics, 4.4 does not have a section saying involve local communities, which concerns me a little bit. That's something that I think should be there somewhere.
Councillor Mercer, you've muted yourself.
I think I must have hit the keyboard and not accidentally not muting myself. I don't know how far along what it was, but 1.7 in Appendix 1 refers to the longer term growth of Northampton and Bedford Borough, but not Peterborough, which is right on our doorstep as well. And for the north of Northamptonshire, Peterborough is the nearest large urban area, not Northampton or Bedford. So I think that ought to be mentioned. something that's got, should we say, I wouldn't say the elephant in the room, but an issue that's festering below the surface is the conflict between commuting and churn. Our town centres are places we're trying to regenerate and to protect the high streets of and the shopping centres. That in turn requires churn of people coming in and out. But at the same time, our railway stations are trying to attract people to drive in, leave their car all day and then take a train down to London. The two concepts are in conflict, and at some point that's going to cause problems because you can't be winning both of them at the same time in the same place. Finally, at the end of it, in stages of plan preparation 1.8, it talks about developing the thing and going through the various stages, but it doesn't give us any indication of how much weight it will carry subsequently. And no plan is worth even bothering with unless you can actually use it to shape development through planning management. And so that in turn requires that some degree of weight can be expected to be applied to it. Those are my points, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mercer. Which councillor wishes to speak next?
We have Councillor Scarborough, Chair.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Scarborough.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I very much like the approach to the upcoming strategic plan. I think that's entirely sound. I would very much endorse the comments made by my fellow councillors about the tremendous track record of this committee and its officers, and express my hope that it will be carried through into the new authority as best it can. I do have some concerns, however, shared by other councillors about the ASF. When I joined Wellingborough Council for the first time some years ago, we had a tripartite system of this sort, started with the regional spatial strategy, then you have the structure plan, and then you have the local plan. The RSS was, in general terms, to be honest, a spare wheel on the process. And unsurprisingly, it was fairly shortly after abolished. I have a concern. I agree with councillors. This is too much in the hands of the politicians and the senior civil servants. It doesn't appear to fit into the independently tested planning system that we have at the moment. So the question about how the ASF should be independently examined, if our officers have any influence on the shaping of policy in this area, that seems to me to be in many ways the critical question about the ASF. And I do think as well, Councillor Mercer is right to say we need to be sure that the ASF adds value, because if it doesn't, what's the point of it? For what it's worth, I think we can work within this, but it's going to take a lot of work to turn it into a useful document. That, however, is for the new authority and specifically for our officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scarborough. David, are there any other councillors wish to speak?
Two to go, Chair. Councillor Jenny.
All right, yes, thank you, Councillor Jenny.
Right, thank you, Chairman. Well, I totally endorse all the comments that have been made about the ARC. It's a very frustrating committee to go and sit on because we all know exactly what is needed and we don't get it. There's no two ways about it. So I'm absolutely convinced that Northamptonshire needs to be in there to be making itself felt. We had discussions with some of our leading officers about this today, and obviously we will be doing our absolute total damnedest while we're still able to go to those meetings to push the agenda for Northamptonshire. So I welcome this this programme on page 35. if I was being cynical, I would suggest that it is an optimistic programme, but I would love to be proved wrong in the summer of 2024. And on a more constructive note, I'd like to thank all the officers that I've had the pleasure of working with in the last 6 or 7 years that I've been on this committee. And I look forward to seeing you all the other side of the Great Divide on the 1st of April. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jenny. Right. Who do we have next then?
Last but not least, Councillor Brackenbury, Chair.
Oh yeah, Councillor Brackenbury.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And yes, like other speakers, I mean, I'm worried about the ARC, and I'm worried about the way that planning in the ARC could cut across what we're trying to do locally in Northamptonshire or North Northamptonshire. And certainly our involvement, our physical involvement in the ARC is somewhat peripheral, but so we have always got to be alert to avoid having all the housing and none of the good bits dumped upon us. However, I think there's been a tremendous amount of very good work done. I admire the optimism, and let's make it happen. On page 35 to actually get a strategic plan up and running. And I think that that's got to be a priority for the new authority and for every colleague that's worked on it. I think really, I don't really want to sort of plough through all the excellent comments that colleagues have already made, but I would like to make sure that the new authority takes planning policy and strategic planning as seriously as this committee has done over the years. It's been an honour and a pleasure to have served on this committee for really quite a long time. It was Councillor Mercer many years ago, when leader of East Northamptonshire Council, who once who suggested I should become chairman of planning policy, and then I had long blonde hair. But anyway, you can see what it's done to me. But no, on a more serious note, Chairman, I would like to just join everybody else to thank all the officers and to thank all the members, both serving now and previous, for their friendship, their good humour, the complete lack of party political matters and involvement, and the fact that there's been a bunch of us, officers and members alike, sitting down together to do the very best that we can for the residents of North Northamptonshire, and may that long continue in the new authority. And thank you, Chairman.
Very good.
Thank you, Councillor Brackenbury. I was thinking what to say at the close of the meeting, and you've actually said a lot of the things I was planning to say. But yeah, it certainly is very important that we have some sort of setup that looks at things strategically the way that this committee has. We all know the importance of the things we've been dealing with, and it would certainly be a mistake if there wasn't some sort of similar thing going on after the new authority is set up. Right, we've had all the comments from.
We've got Councillor Tebbett's hands popped up in the interim.
All right, yeah, Councillor Tebbett, yes, please.
And Councillor Waters as well now.
All right, yes. Councillor Tebbett, then Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wishing to endorse the comments that have been made. For me, it's been a particular privilege to have chaired the Joint Planning Committee for the last 2 and a bit years, and to hand it over to you in good order, Andrew, so that we can sorry, Anthony, so that we can move it forward. And if you'd like me to, I will propose the recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And now I've forgotten who was Councillor Waters.
Councillor.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Right, I certainly second the recommendation, Chair. Get that out of the way. obviously I can't leave here without saying things, because it's been 16 years I've been on this committee from day one. It's very sad and tears in my eyes to think that this is the last committee of this. Like all good things, we just hope the future will bring us better things, and I'm sure it will. Because we have we've learned a lot over the last 16 years. The main thing, Mr. Chairman, I believe, we've gone forward in the last 16 years, and that's so important. The sad thing that we've lost is that Andrew, when I first came on 16 years ago, like myself, had hair. We seem to have lost the hair syndrome. But but it's nice to feel that I'd like to say to him, and is the whole of the staff, a very big thank you. And I'm sure Chair Mike and other chairmen who like myself, who have had the privilege of working with everyone over these many years. And I'm just a bit worried about where the 16 years go. It's just simply flew by, really, hasn't it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's life. But I won't keep anybody out of there, you know, keep going, because obviously we're all a bit emotional about the last meeting. So before we all go into tears, I'd like to wish you everyone best of luck. And congratulations, Chairman, in your chairmanship for the forthcoming year. And can I thank my proposer and the committee for electing me as your vice. And I'm sure we shall work as we have in the past together. Thank you very much all. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. For a point of clarification, though, I think this is the only meeting I'm chairing, because this is the last meeting of this committee. So, it's not for the year ahead. Anyway, no, I'm
performance, nevertheless.
Yeah, no, I'm very honoured to be doing it. Right, we've had a mover and a seconder, but before we get to that, we have had various points brought up. I'd like to give the officers a chance to respond. Andrew, and maybe the rest of your team there, do you have any comments to make?
Well, I'll just pick up a few of the comments members made. I think we're well aware of the position in relation to the Arc Spatial Framework. I think a number of things. Members talked about the importance of engagement, and yes, absolutely critical. And one of the points we make about the timescale that the government's working to is that mustn't be at the price of proper engagement, proper testing of this strategy that goes forward. So I've already raised questions with them about the independent examination, and it is apparently something they're still thinking about. Some of the other issues that you picked up on, Councillor Mercer talking about our reference to Bedford and what's the other council, Simon, where we're talking about?
West Northampton are the two.
Yeah, sorry, West Northampton and Bedford. Those are cross-boundary issues where there's likely to be cross-boundary growth pressures, but we can certainly mention the importance of Peterborough as a neighbouring major centre. Weight to the plan. Obviously, you'll know this, but it gathers weight as it progresses, and that's why it's quite important that we make speedy progress. And ultimately, it is the development plan. It's the starting point for decisions. And the only other point I think I'll respond to, because we can pick up most of your other concerns, is that about the need for North Northamptonshire to be in there influencing this. And you've been really clear on that, and we've been really clear on officers in making sure that we're involved in the key groups going forward. So we will continue to keep members engaged in this. There are sessions coming up, I know, for ARC Leaders Group where you'll have an opportunity to input, and we'll make sure that we brief you in preparation for those. And the only point I'd finally make is thank you for the thanks that you've conveyed to the team. It's been a privilege and a pleasure to work with the Joint Planning Committee and to achieve what we have done over the last 15 years. And as Councillor Jenny said, hopefully see some of you on the other side.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Right, we have had the recommendation moved and seconded, so we'll move straight to the vote. Just to remind you, it's item 6.1 on page 30, the recommendation there. Can I see all those in favour, please?
Full screen of hands, Chair.
All right, once again, unanimous. Right, that brings us probably to the end of the meeting. We do have item 8, urgent items. Is there anything in the urgent items section?
No,
No, Chairman.
All right, well, that's we are at the end of an era now. Then I know I'm a relative newcomer to this committee, but I would like to express thanks to everyone who's served on it. I know there's been a lot that's been achieved, and this could be a wonderful model of how the new authority could work in the future going forward, of the county council and 4 local authorities working together. And so thank you to everyone, as has already been mentioned. Thank you to Andrew and his team for what they have achieved. And we look forward to the good work that we've already achieved going on into the future, and more good things being achieved. So thank you very much to everyone involved. And I now declare the meeting closed.